Hi, Abba. Good to see you. How are you?
Hey Simon, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for joining me. I guess before we,
Joining you in the London heat wave.
yeah, about time, right? Nice to have a bit of sunshine. Um, Before we get into things, I normally just do some quick introductions. So, for anybody that doesn't know me, I'm Simon Spire, founder of Data Agents. We work with marketers who are sitting on more data than ever and more AI tools than ever, but struggling to actually connect that and make better, faster decisions. So, we're trying to sort of close the loop between outcomes and technology and data. And this video series is a set of sort of honest conversations with people who I know are experts in actually what delivers performance and moves the needle when it comes to marketing. And there's no presentations or anything like that. It's just useful tips and advice from people who've been there, done it. And I know Abba as a former client, somebody who's massively sort of strategically led, and I think a sort of kindred spirit in cutting through the crap and focusing on pragmatic, effective marketing. So Abba, why don't you introduce yourself quickly?
Oh well, yeah, super quick intro from me. I'm Abba. I'm kind of like a seasoned startup CMO, having done that for the last 10 years. Previously worked for Rupert Murdoch. So lots of questions about succession. We can do that later. And then before that, worked in ad agencies. So kind of grew up with people like Simon as well in our old jobs.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I think, I mean, you've got such a unique sort of blend of experience in terms of startup and particularly in fintech, but also like you say, working in the Murdoch empire and on the agency side of things. So you're incredibly well equipped for the few things that I wanted to chat about. I thought we met up a few weeks ago, and one of the things that I thought was sort of really interesting, and we started to discuss, was really around frequency of messaging and how most brands use that to over communicate to compensate for poor strategy and poor brand. And I just wondered maybe if we start there and tell me whether you sort of subscribe to that point of view and some of the things that you've learned along the way, because I find that typically high frequency is the price you pay when you haven't got all the other things sorted out. But I'd love to know whether you agree or disagree with that point of view.
You're going to set me off now, Simon,
Go
on
for
like
it.
uh,
A
a
rant.
30-minute um, kind of rant on this stuff. Yeah, like there's a few things that that are true, uh, which is psychologically things play a huge impact on your brain, and the extent to which they play an impact on your brain defines whether they create memory structures or not, right? So, like if you write something down, I know in an age of AI, it's very uncool, but if you write something down, it's going to do more synapses in your brain than if you don't write something down. And advertising is very similar. So you have to think about how many times you are going to need to talk to someone to make that impact on their brain. Now, trust me, the Metas and the Googles of this world do not subscribe to this theory. They subscribe to like a multi-frequency, multi-touch, multi-daily. I'm just going to hit you with everything. But the reality is, in human psychology, we've all got a book that we've never forgotten reading, or a film we've never forgotten watching. And advertising actually really is a craft skill which is no different. And honestly, the economics of this like really psychological approach when I worked at Habito were like business transformative without a doubt. So most advertising, will work on the basis that someone between sees it between 4 and 7 times.
Yeah.
Habito advertising worked on the basis that you saw it once. So my economics of growth were enormous, but that was not at all about money. It was not at all about media deployment. It ended up being a lot about media deployment.
Sure.
We'll get to that. But in the first stages, it was all about messaging and craft. And I think we've lost that. And I think we've lost it in the miasma of, a lot of the big engines like Meta just saying, give me 300 ads and I'll tell you what works. I mean, imagine if someone said, write me 300 books, write me 300 films. It just doesn't make any sense. Sorry, I'm old.
No, I think you're spot on, and I think I mean I'm sort of interested in. I think the economics, as you describe it, definitely stack up. At Habito, was that an easy? Did you have the autonomy to make that decision and see prove the benefit of it, or how do you go about sort of changing some of those sort of structures or preconceptions which are we need, particularly in a category like that which is ridiculously high frequency. How do you go on that journey and get that change made?
I mean, I think the art of being a really good CMO, I'm not saying I'm a really good CMO, but I think the art of being a really good CMO is the art of the brief. It's a bit like being a good sports coach. You've got to have everyone on the same page and know what you're doing. If you've got that brief, and you've got enough skin in the game to know that if it doesn't work, it's going to be down to you. I think that's really helpful. I mean, I was really lucky at Habito. My founder, Dan, was actually a previous rock musician, then a session musician. So he had like a lot of sensitivity to the importance of creating emotions in people, if that makes any sense. If that's a like useful segue between advertising and music. And so I took him to every meeting. We went through every creative process together. He hated a lot of what we were doing, but he could understand the emotional pull we were trying to create in people. And I think that's what's really interesting, and what's changed in the last 20 years is previously advertising was expected to create that emotional pull, make people feel something, to buy something in the future. Now we've just got ourselves into a performance marketing like black hole of just telling people stuff, shouting at people at stuff, telling them how amazing our product is, and expecting them to respond. The response rates in advertising over the last 20 years have dramatically decreased, right?
Yeah.
As a result of that kind of lack of creativity and that lack of understanding of the customer. And all the money has gone into a couple of holding companies who have no interest in what really makes people tick. They have a lot of interest in what makes them tick.
Yeah. And I think there's a very real danger that it just gets worse because, as you were saying, AI, it doesn't need to be 300 variants. It could be 3 million variants of the core idea that then, is distributed unbelievably efficiently, but, it's just slop that isn't really moving the dial or creating any affinity to the brand.
I think AI is marketing's savior.
I agree when it's deployed properly and pointed at the right
Correct.
things. I don't think
Correct.
it has, to me, it's a wonderful tool for understanding audiences, understanding data, being able to connect that to business outcomes, being able to connect it to the economics of the organization. And then it may play a role also from a distribution and a delivery perspective. But if you're just pointing it at the distribution and just using it to create assets, it's disconnected from any of that sort of upstream thinking.
Yes, I completely agree. And anything that's derivative versus generative is problematic, right? When you're creating stuff that is supposed to be distinctive, interesting, define your brand, make you look different to everyone else. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And just, I guess, final question on this topic. In an industry like financial services, when you're a challenger fintech, and this might go back to the sort of audience understanding that you were talking about and how you uncovered that with the business founder, but without sort of describing the campaign and so on, what does brave creative look like? Because you obviously need to cut through in a cluttered category, and you're the challenger. So I'm just sort of interested in, are there any sort of rules of thumb for what is, or how you would define brave creative?
Interesting. I have, and I'm not sure whether this is helpful, but this is how it works in my head. I use an analogy of a bath, right? A hot bath is really nice, right? You're tired from the day, you want to relax, stick some bubbles in, have a hot bath. An ice bath, I mean, it's not great, but it's incredibly impactful, right? If you've run a marathon or you've done some hardcore physical exercise. The worst thing you can present someone with is a warm bath, unless you're like a tiny baby. So the way I always look at creative work is it an ice bath? Very polarizing, but incredibly impactful. Is it a hot bath? More universally appealing, but harder to deliver against. And if it's a warm bath, I'm just like, don't even bother.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's
And so
right.
I use that litmus
That
test
spectrum.
in my
Yeah.
head.
Yeah. No, I think that's smart. So building on that theme, and a couple of themes that we've talked about, I think as marketers, there are so many, or a danger that there's so many signals now to pick up on and decide what to act on and what doesn't, and how you stay strategically focused on the bigger picture while you're picking up on all of these signals, or people in other parts of the organization are also picking up on those signals. And when we chatted, you had a really nice model of sonar versus radar, and I wondered if you could expand a little bit on what that is, because I think it's really interesting.
People are going to think I'm completely mad, but I guess the start point of our conversation was how marketing has become incredibly short-termist.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons by that. There's no criticism of marketeers, but like we're always chasing our tail, and what that ends up being is we put our money into what is most measurable, right? Which tends to be performance marketing channels, which tend to have a very short-term output in terms of what they deliver. So I always describe the art of a CMO or a good marketing strategy is this is where we get to radar and sonar, is marketing strategy does radar, right? It tells you the bit of the sea that you're searching in. And the art of a marketing director or, a good agency, whoever it is don't make the radar too narrow because it gives the team no ability to innovate, and don't make it too wide because then you're just, fishing for a plane in the sea. So, and then when I describe that, once you set your radar, sonar is all the stuff that you can let your team do. As long as you set the actual angles for them to work in, they can do anything. They can be completely autonomous. They can innovate. They can fail. They can learn. And as I said, if it's too narrow, they don't have enough scope. If it's too wide, you're setting them up to fail. So that's the art of a good marketing strategy, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, interestingly, I would say that discipline is also the discipline that needs to be applied to the use of AI in marketing, because we see this sort of explosion in what agentic solutions can do. But I think it's creating that environment for them to be doing the right things. And so it's not too wide where they're just doing things that aren't really additive and not creating value, or that they're so narrow that it's just a basic automation and it's something that you arguably don't need an agent to be doing. But actually, to your point, if you get the focus right, then you can actually say, no, these are the things where we can have something that's doing something autonomously within these guardrails, because we know it's going to do it better, faster, cheaper, whatever the definition of success is, than we would be able to otherwise. I guess the thing that interests me is how do you hold the line long enough to know that it's on track and that it's working? Because, as you say, there's a sort of short-termism, and I think some of that short-termism perhaps comes from founders and other stakeholders in terms of hitting monthly numbers, quarterly numbers. And there's that balance, right, in terms of, no, I know this is the direction and these are the strategic plays that we need to be making. How do you hold that line, and how do you create that evidence that you are on track and that you are doing the right things?
Yeah, I mean, it's why most marketing directors don't survive beyond 18 months, right? So I think you need to deliver short term for sure. In a marketing role, you can't sit there in the board and go, trust me, trust me, trust me, trust me. You have to be able to move the levers enough to make a tangible difference. And then you absolutely, like a founder does when they go to sell the dream of their business to a VC, you need to be an incredible storyteller, and bring the board on side about what you want to do, why you want to do it. And that's a combination of like narrative and data. It's like a crazy skill set that you need to have. So I think it's a combination of short-term wins, so everyone trusts you, a data and storytelling-led narrative in the same way that you would think about like going to pitch to a VC, and then actually setting yourself up before you even start the campaign to be ready to measure. So I always say plan to measure. Don't never sit back after like a year of a campaign and go, oh, I don't know how it worked. No, as much work needs to go into the measurement and how you're going to measure that campaign as it does need to go into the actual creation of the campaign. And if you're not doing that, you're going to find it really hard to come back to the board in a year's time and say, I spent £1 million and I don't really know what worked. No, you need to come back and say, I spent £1 million and this is what worked.
Yeah, spot on. It's music to my ears. You need to be able to say, we're going to spend £1 million. This is how we know it's going to work. This is how we will prove whether it works. And then that's what you need to be able to report on, however often you need to, with that group. And I think,
Yeah, and it's pretty boring. Like it's like doing old school things like you and I would have done back in the day, Simon, which is like saying, "Oh, we're not going to advertise in London. We're going to advertise everywhere else. We're going to isolate London, or whatever. It doesn't matter what region." And then you look back at your data and go, "Was there a difference in terms of this region's behaviour versus all the other people who saw the campaign?" I mean, it's not difficult, but I guess in a world of performance marketing, that's not how people think. They just think about direct click attribution.
I think it so often gets sacrificed because there is just such a focus on the overarching performance. But if you say, actually, we're going to take 10% of the audience and we're not going to communicate with them, and that's the cost of us being able to measure and learn and optimize and all of those sort of things. There's a lot of fear that, well, aren't we just losing out on sales then because we're not marketing to 10% of our audience? And at some point, you've got to be able to trade that off and say, that's true, but we never know if it's money well spent unless we have that discipline. And I think there is just this fixation that it's all about maximizing reach, and obviously some very poor metrics around that, like impressions and stuff that just is utterly meaningless.
Oh yes, impressions are utterly meaningless.
um, I was just looking at my notes. I was going to ask you back on the point about sort of founders, VCs, and so on. My impression is that a lot of them don't understand brand, and it ends up costing them quite quickly because they don't understand distinctive assets. And to your point earlier, the difference that can make to the sort of economics of marketing spend. And I suspect also a lot of the types of businesses that you've worked with and worked alongside are quite often founded out of technology and product rather than out of audience and customer. So I'm just interested in whether you think that is a fair sort of synopsis, and then actually how you do fix that inside a business where you are able to, I guess, sort of make that sort of cultural change in terms of understanding of brand and marketing and the discipline that needs to fit around it.
Again, this is a rabbit hole I could go down for hours, but I think founders are all really different in terms of their understanding of brand. I think most VCs, most sensible VCs, see brand as a moat. So they do actually see it as something worth investing in. So I don't think that's a difficult pitch to VCs to say we're going to do X, Y, and Z. I think the problem, and I'm going to go back to, I'm back to my warm bath, hot bath, ice bath analogy. Most people don't have any taste. And I think it's going to be one of the most interesting things that happens in the age of AI is the rise of the critical thinking degrees, where you come to something and say, why is this going to work? Because actually a lot of the mathematical stuff that's been so important recently, I mean, that is the stuff that AI is going to do. AI can't tell you whether something is going to be a good idea, right? It's going to give you a derivative idea, it might give you a generative idea, but right now it doesn't give you great ideas. And so I think it's going to be a very big skill set that founders need to lean into. Actually, it's in their brain. When I joined Habito, I looked at some psychological work that looked at founders who were primarily male. Sorry, I mean, it was back in the day in 2017. And they looked at how the guy looked at his baby and the guy looked at his brand logo. And it actually sent off the same synapses in their brain, right? So there's, founders do have like a deep emotional connection to brand and marketing. It's just really how you snap them out of the, oh, we're just going to pour some more money into Google. I did have a conversation with a founder the other day. We were looking at his logo, and I was like, it's not trademarkable, right? Like there's 100, other businesses called this who look like this. And he was like, the the logo is just a squiggle on the page. Like, okay, so we're going to spend multi millions of pounds over the next 5-10 years on something that is undefendable and undistinguishable. So I also think, and it's really hard, right? Because as I said, the marketing average tenure is 18 months, right? Marketing director. And you're often, and I've often been the bad news bear. This isn't working. We need to change this. Your logo is not trademarkable, all of this stuff. And it takes a quite brave marketeer who's going to put their job, their mortgage, their future career on the line to maybe have some tough conversations on what's working and not working. And I think a lot of what's going on in marketing right now is people just, keeping their job.
Yeah, that's fair. The other thing that's interesting is obviously the ownership of brand sits with marketers, but you're, as a CMO, leading a team of marketers with different talents and responsibilities. Some might be on the brand and com side, some might be in the performance marketing side. And I guess there's an imperative that even the performance marketers understand the brand and what it stands for and are bringing that through into all of the things that they're doing that are driving short-term demand and performance. But are there ways that you've either structured things or are thinking about sort of future structures in the teams that you're building and running and hiring and all of those sort of things that you think are going to need to change so that the brand remains front and center and doesn't get lost as new tools, new data, new channels emerge?
Yeah, I mean we're in a self-serving world, right? Which is performance drives everything. It's not really performance. I call it lack of performance because when I look at the actual data, it's mainly like woefully terrible. But we're kind of drug addicts to the drug dealers that are Meta and Google and YouTube, etc. So they tell us that it's doing us good. And ultimately, if you actually like stop doing it for a bit, for like a couple of months, like I did at Habitat, you just go, oh, yeah, it doesn't actually make an impact. Not at all. I think this idea of performance versus brands, it makes me quite cross. Often people, when I'm going for a CMO role, will say, are you more performance or more brand? I'm like, I'm a CMO, right? Performance and brand. So let's call it lack of performance, Meta and Google, and like what you're going to invest in your actual uh, brand are intrinsically linked. And I had like a bit of a brain fart last night. I had like a bunch of 11-year-old boys at my house doing a sausage cookout. I've got a big, um, uh, uh, kind of fire pit.
Yeah.
And I was like, performance is like kindling, right? You have to keep putting
Going at it.
tons of it on. It never
Yeah.
really makes you warm. You can't really cook food on it. You put a couple of logs on the fire, a bit like brand, and suddenly that kindling is going to go all night and the logs are going to go all night. And weirdly, the difference between kindling, a little fire in a fire pit versus putting logs on, i.e., brand, is suddenly everyone congregates around the fire. They have a conversation about it. They have an opinion. It doesn't matter whether it's bad or good.
Yeah.
Actually, they're suddenly there in the kind of centrifugal force of what you're trying to create as a marketer. And I know it's a bit of a kind of tangential example, but I do think you can't have brand without performance. That's, you can't light a fire without kindling. But if you keep just investing in the performance, you know that you're going to, you know, you're not going to be able to cook anything. You're not going to get people around the fire. You're going to have to keep piling the money on. So I'm sorry, I don't know whether that's helpful or not,
No, it's
but
really helpful.
really like made
Yeah,
an aha moment for me last night.
it's an interesting metaphor. I mean, brand makes performance better, and vice versa. I think
Correct.
a mutual friend of ours talks about performance channels as being the tangible manifestation of the brand. It is the moment where the audience experiences the brand, and if that is um, relevant, resonant, all the things that the brand stands for, it's much likely to convert at a performance level anyway. So I think the two are inextricably linked, and I think there is certainly at a senior level you can't distinguish between brand and performance. That they are, you need to be able to think in both terms and then think about actually how you apply it practically. The other
Yeah,
thing
I
that
did work with a founder a few years ago. Maybe this is an entertaining story, who did this whole big brand revamp. I mean, that in itself was terrible. And then they put this big branding campaign on. I joined the business about 3 months later, and nothing happened in the kind of the big brand campaign. They did a big outdoor campaign, they did some TV ads, etc., etc. And I mean, the ad was terrible, but like, it's rare that you see an ad that is like so terrible that nothing happens. Something, something should happen somewhere, even if it's not what you wanted to happen. And then when I dug into the data, I found out that they had turned off PPC, they turned off performance whilst the brand campaign ran.
wow,
And I was like, that's a bit like
interesting.
a bit like putting an ad on TV, if you're Marks and Spencers, and then shutting all your shops for like a month.
Yeah,
So no one could buy anything. I mean, I know there's like there is occasionally, demand is your friend, and if no one can buy it, then it's going to accelerate it. But like, I mean, that's going to an extreme to make sure that like nobody could find you.
yeah,
I mean,
that's yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive, isn't it? I'm not sure.
yeah. And I think a lot of that is about digital, is like, and AI, I think is the same thing, is you kind of need to sit there at your desk for a moment and just describe to yourself what you're about to do
Yeah,
and then understand whether it makes sense or not, rather than just kind of leave it in the hands of AI. So if someone had actually sat, in front of a computer and said, we're going to do a TV campaign and we're going to make sure no one can find us when we do it, Does that sound
That
sensible?
makes sense. Yeah. And perhaps just the last sort of thought on that. I mean, it's clear that the brand experience stretches beyond the marketing team. It's in product, customer service, sales, wherever it might be. As the architect of the brand, how do you make sure that those sort of crazy things aren't happening in other disciplines that are going to either compromise the brand and or compromise the impact of the marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, a lot of it is relationship building, having a good opco, where all those people who were sitting there making those decisions coming together. I always at Habito, I think where I was most successful is I brought everyone with me, like every all hands. I told everyone everything about the brand campaign and what was going on, and even if they thought I was mad, they were involved in the process. They had input into the process, and so when the ad went live and went nuts, even if they didn't like it, they could feel like they'd had a hand on it. It's really hard. Every COO will tell you talk about the product, which is the equivalent of Coca-Cola telling you how they make Coca-Cola. I mean, back to talking talking to yourself about what you're doing. And you know brand in product is quite a hard thing to deliver. Um, and I was excited to see AJ Coyne get promoted to be CMO at Monzo. That is a great example of where brand, product, marketing, design, operations are all sitting really close together. I think it's kind of impossible for a marketeer to deliver. I think you have to have a really good CEO or a COO, or at least a good ear to the CEO to make that happen, which is what I had at Habito. So I also think it can't be marketing's sole job. Um, but equally marketing, have a huge role as storytellers, data sellers, and yeah, it's a hard job. It's a hard
It's a
job.
hard job. It's a tough job, but one that you've done incredibly well, and I'm sure will carry on doing incredibly well. I think let's wrap it up there, Abba. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank
I
you, Simon.
knew when I asked you to do this, you would just come with total radical candor. And I've really enjoyed the
Sorry.
conversation. No, this
I
is
didn't
about
swear too much. I don't
providing.
think I swore too
You
much.
didn't swear. I don't think you swear at all. But yeah, I mean, the whole point of this is, honest, practical advice and tips. And thank you so much for delivering on that.
Thanks for having me. I love the maps in the background, by the way.
Oh, thank you. We'll speak soon. Thanks, Abba.
Thanks, Simon. Bye.
Bye.